Starting on the top of Nun Aleph Amar Aleph, we were mamish in the middle of an Inyan here. The Gemara brought an Iboya from Rabbi Lazar regarding the par Yoma Kippurim of the Kohen Gadol. Could that be made as a Tumura or not? What does that depend on? A carbon of a Yachid could be made as a Tumura. A carbon of a Tzibur or even of Shutfin could not be made as a Tumura. So we know that the kapara of this par is not only for the Kohen Gadol himself, it's also for his brothers, the Kohanim. But the question is the kapara mainly for himself, and the brothers, the Kohanim, are sort of riding along with him, floating along with him? Or no, they are established on this kapara as much as him himself, and therefore you cannot make it as a Tumura. So the Gemara brought here a Braise where it talks about the stringencies that there are in a carbon, in the original carbon, over the Tumura, and the stringencies that there is in the Tumura over the carbon itself. And the Gemara said that because it says in the Braise regarding the carbon that we're talking about a carbon that's noyeg b'yachid kibbutz tzibur. What does it say in that Braise? That the chumrah of a carbon is that it's doiche Shabbos and that it's doiche tumah, and the other chumrah also is that this carbon can make a tumura. What kind of a carbon are we talking about that's doiche Shabbos and doiche tumah, but it can make a tumura? Usually those two things don't go together. If it's doiche Shabbos and doiche tumah, that means that it's a carbon tzibur. If it's a carbon sibur, it doesn't make a Tumura. So the Gemara wanted to suggest, we're talking about the par Yoma Kippurim of the Kohen Gadol, which is Deicha Shabbos and Tumah, and it could also make a Tumura, because it's a carbon for a Yachid. That was the Raya the Gemara brought. So the Gemara says, no, that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about the Ayil, the Oyla. The Oyla of the Kohen Gadol, not the Chatos. And then the Gemara continues and explains that maybe it's not talking about one carbon. Maybe it's talking about Shem Zevach. Maybe what we're saying is that B'chlal, regarding karbanis, we find stringencies over Tmura. We're not talking about one single carbon. Amongst karbanis, we find one chumreh that it could be doiche Shabbos and Tumah for one kind of carbon. Another kind of carbon you find that it has a stringency that it can make a Tmura, but maybe we're not even talking about the same carbon. So that's the last point that we learned. The Gemara says no. The Braise is not saying Shem Zevach, because if we would be talking about karbanis B'chlal, then you have to include all kinds of karbanis, including B'chayr and Meiser. And what's the story with B'chayr and Meiser? B'chayr and Meiser are unique. They're different than all karbanis. How? All karbanis, you cannot be makdish a balmum as a carbon. By a B'chayr and a Meiser, the kedusha of B'chayr and Meiser does take effect even on a balmum. A B'chayr that's born a balmum is a B'chayr. Meiser behemah that comes out of the barn and you make it Meiser, it could be a Meiser even if it's a balmum. So therefore, in this Braise, it was saying that the chumrah of Tumura is that by Tumura, the Kedusha is chal on a balmum, not on karbanis. But if you're saying that it's talking about Shem Zevach, so then, how are we making a distinction between Tumura and Zevach? Zevach, the karbanis, includes B'chayr and Meiser, which are chal on a balmum kavua, and the en yaitz and the chulun legazes v'la avid, and therefore, just like a Tumura itself, since the Kedusha is chal and a balmum, and therefore it cannot be fully redeemed to ever be worked with again, so it should be the same thing regarding a carbon. So that was the last thing we learned. So therefore the Gemara concludes, El Shem Zevach Loi Katani. The Braise here is talking about karbanis, and it says that there's a stringency of a carbon over Tmura. It's not talking about all karbanis. It's talking about one particular carbon. So now the Gemara asks a question: Umay shna Tumura? What's the difference? What's the difference regarding Tumura? We said before that when it mentions Tumura, it's not talking about one particular Tumura. It's talking b'chlal about Tumura of all different kinds of karbanis. So why regarding Tumura, when the Braise says the stringency of Tumura over the original carbon, it's talking about all kinds of Tumuras. When it talks about Zevach, it's not talking about all kinds of karbanis, it's talking about only about one carbon, either the par Kohen Gadol or the Ayil of the Kohen Gadol. So the Gemara answers, Shem Tumura Achasi. When the Braise mentions Tumura, there's no problem to say that the Braise means all kinds of Tumuras, because all Tumuras have the exact same halacha. There is no difference between one or another kind of a Tumura. But Zevach, Ikke B'chayr, V'Ike Meiser. If you're going to say that the Braise is talking about all kinds of karbanis, you can't say that, because when it comes to karbanis, there are different kinds of karbanis from one end to the other. And there's even the B'chayr and Meiser, where the kedusha of the carbon is chal and a balmum. So therefore, you have to say that when the Braise says Zevach, it's talking about one particular carbon. So we have two options. Either the Braise is talking about the par of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, or it's talking about the Ayil of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. That's the pshat in the Braisa. But now the Gemara asks a question. Maybe when it talks about that one zevach, again, we're looking for a unique kind of a carbon. We're looking for a carbon that's doiche Shabbos and Tumah on one hand, but on the other hand, it could make a Tmura. But the Gemara says, isn't there a third option, or Rav Sheishes, according to Rav Sheishes, that said before, that maybe we're not talking about the part of the Kohen Gadol. Maybe we're talking about the aisle, which is a carbon oila. He says that we could be talking about the carbon oila, the aisle that Adam brings on Yom Kippur. I'll bring you another option. Loikma bePesach. Why wouldn't he want to say that the zevach that this Braisa is speaking about is the carbon Pesach, and this carbon Pesach has the combination of what we're looking for. The deiches of Shabbos v'satumah. It's a carbon that pushes off Shabbos and Tumah, and also v'isat Tmura. And the carbon Pesach is considered to be a carbon of a Yachid, the carbon Yachidu. It's a carbon Yachid, and therefore you can make a Tmura. So right now the Gemara is going according to the opinion that it is that carbon Pesach is a carbon Yachid, and therefore can make a Tmura. So maybe that is what this Braisa was speaking about when it said the Zevach, that it has all these things in it. So the Gemara answers, no. That's not an option, because Kesavar, the Tana of this Braisa holds, Ein Sheichten a Pesach ala Yachid. A carbon Pesach cannot be brought by one single person. You have to have a Chabura for the carbon Pesach. It's impossible for one person to eat the entire animal of a carbon Pesach. If you remember, we learned this in Masechta Psachim. One opinion is that you don't have to eat the carbon Pesach. The mitzvah is to eat it, but even if you don't end up eating it, you can bring the carbon Pesach alone. That was the one that was asking the question. That's what he held. That the carbon Pesach could be brought by one Yachid. So the Gemara answers, no. The carbon Pesach must be brought by a Chabura, because the whole point of the carbon Pesach is to eat it. So therefore, there's no Tmura by a carbon Pesach, because it's not brought by a Yachid. But the Gemara asks, V'noikmei bePesach Sheni. Why can't we say that the case of this Braisa, when it says that there's one Zevach, that's Doiche Shabbos and Doiche Tumah, and you can make it a Tmura, maybe it's the Pesach Sheni. But Pesach Sheni, the Gemara says it doesn't have to all be eaten. The Pesach Sheni, one person brings it alone. What happens by Pesach Sheni? The whole difference between the Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni is that Pesach Rishon, all of Klal Yisrael is bringing it. So you could find a group to join you. By Pesach Sheni, what happens if a person is alone? He was Tameh, and now he has to bring the Pesach Sheni. So he could bring it alone by the Pesach Sheni. So it is a carbon Yachid.
You have to have Bnei Yisrael to do.
That did the Pesach Rishon. Roiv Bnei Yisrael did. No, the other way around. You have to have that Roiv Bnei Yisrael did the Pesach Rishon in order for it to be Pesach Sheni to be an option, right? So maybe Pesach Sheni is bringing alone as a Yachid, and it's Doiche Shabbos and it's Doiche Tumah. So the Gemara says, no, mi Dochi Tumah is the Pesach Sheni Doiche Tumah. So as Rashi says, we'll see soon in the Gemara will discuss this. There's one mandama that says that Pesach Sheni is not Doiche Tumah. So Rav Sheishes, that was explaining this Braisa, was following that opinion, that Pesach Sheni is not Doiche Tumah, and therefore that can't be the Zevach that this Braisa is talking about. So now the Gemara questions this itself. V'tana, and according to this Tana that says that Pesach Sheni is not Doiche Tumah, Ma'ishna Pesach. What's the difference from the first? What's the difference? The Pesach, the Karile Carbon Yachid. Sorry, let me start this again. The Gemara is going to come back to the Pesach Sheni being Doiche Tumah soon, but here the Gemara comes back actually to something that was said before in the Gemara on Daf Nun Amud Aleph. On Daf Nun Amud Aleph, the Gemara brought the Braisa of Rab Meir and Rab Yaakov, and they spoke about the carbon Pesach and the carbon Chagigah. And the Gemara calls the carbon Pesach a carbon Yachid. Rab Meir refers to the carbon Pesach as a carbon Yachid, and Rab Yaakov refers to the carbon Chagigah as a carbon Tzibur. So that's what the Gemara is going to explain now. V'tana ma'ishna Pesach the karile carbon Yachid. Why is the carbon Pesach referred to as a carbon Yachid? Or ma'ishna Chagigah the karile carbon Tzibur. Why is the carbon Chagigah called a carbon Tzibur? And the Gemara explains its question. If you're going to say the carbon Chagigah is called a carbon Tzibur because that's when all Yidden gather on Yom Tiv to bring the carbon at the same time. So even though each individual has to bring their own carbon, but yet they're gathering together. So therefore it's called the carbon Tzibur. Pesach Nami, if so, say the same thing regarding the carbon Pesach. All Yidden gather together at the same time and therefore should be called a carbon Tzibur. So the Gemara answers, you're right. The Pesach Rishon has to be called the carbon Tzibur, just like the carbon Chagigah. But ikke Pesach Sheni de lo yasi b'chnufya. What the Braisa was referring to before when it said that the Pesach is a carbon yachid, it was referring to the Pesach Rishon, to Pesach Sheni that is. Pesach Sheni does not come with all Klal Yisrael gathering. One person brings it alone. And therefore that's what he said is called a carbon yachid. So again, what did Rab Meir say before? Rab Meir was asking the question that you see that there's a carbon Pesach that's doiche Shabbos and it's doiche Tumah, even though it is a carbon yachid. What was he talking about? He was talking about the Pesach Sheni, not the Pesach Rishon. Amalei, so he says to him, Imkain, if so, Yehei doiches Shabbos v'esa Tumah. So if that's what Rab Meir was speaking about, so that would come out that he's saying that even the Pesach Sheni is doiche Shabbos and it's doiche Tumah. That's what Rab Meir was saying. Rab Meir was telling the Tanakama there, you're saying that only a carbon tzibur is doiche Shabbos and Tumah? Even a Pesach is also doiche Shabbos and Tumah. And you're telling me that he's talking about Pesach Sheni. So if so, it should come out that Pesach Sheni is doiche Shabbos and Tumah. Amalei, so you answered him, you're right, according to Rab Meir, it is doiche Shabbos and Tumah. Command the Amadochi. He follows the opinion that says that Pesach Sheni is doiche Shabbos and Tumah. Not like what we said before. Before we said it's not, but now the Gemara brings a Braisa that this is actually a machlekes. The Tanya, we learned in a Braisa. We learned this in Pesachim. The Braisa says Pesach Sheni doiches Shabbos. Pesach Sheni only pushes off Shabbos, but ve'ena doiches Tumah. Does not push off Tumah. That's the first mandama. But Rabbi Yehuda Omer af doiches Tumah. Pesach Sheni is doiche Shabbos and it's also doiche Tumah. That's what Rab Meir held, that the Pesach Sheni is just like the Pesach Rishon, that it's doiche Shabbos and doiche Tumah. So this is a new machlokes that comes out of this whole inyan. What's the halach of the Pesach Sheni? Is it doiche Tumah or not? So the Gemara now explains this machlokes. My time the Tanakama. Why does the Tanakama say that the Pesach Sheni is not doiche Tumah? It's only doiche Shabbos but not Tumah. Malach, the answer is Mipnei Tumah Dechisai. You pushed off this person to the Pesach Sheni because he was Tamei, so therefore now he brings this Pesach Sheni. V'yaseh b'Tumah. So he should make this carbon do it when he's Tamei. The whole point of the Pesach Sheni is that he couldn't bring the carbon when he's Tamei. So therefore there's no point of him bringing the Pesach Sheni when he's Tamei. Right, so in other words, what he's saying is, even though usually we have a rule, any carbon that has a set time, Kavuas Manai, it's doiche Shabbos and doiche Tumah, but Pesach Sheni is an exception, because the whole point of Pesach Sheni is that he should not bring it when he's Tamei. But Rabbi Yehuda Malach, Rabbi Yehuda says to you, Omakra, the Torah says, Kechol Chukas HaPesach Yasu Aisai, referring to the Pesach Sheni, that like all of the halachas of the first Pesach, you should do for the Pesach Sheni. And therefore we compare the two, and we say, Vafila B'Tumah. Even if he's Tamei, you bring it just like the Pesach Rishon. The whole point is that he should not bring it when he's Tamei. That's why we pushed him off. So he explains, the Torah is trying to give him a chance to do the Pesach Sheni B'Tara. But if it happened to be that he became Tamei even by the Pesach Sheni, so then he brings the carbon even when he's Tamei. So therefore it's Doiche Shabbos and it's also Doiche Tumah. Okay, now the Gemara comes back to the original Ibaya of Rabbi Lazar. What was his Ibaya? Regarding the Par Kohen Gadol of Yoma Kippurim. Is there Tmura there or not? And what's the question? The other brothers of the Kohenim that are getting a kapara together with the Kohen Gadol, are they established here on this kapara just as like the Kohen Gadol himself, or they're just floating along with him? The main kapara is on the Kohen Gadol himself. So the Gemara now asks, L'chayre, we have a clear raya from a pasuk and a braisa. Typically, why doesn't Rabbi Lazar answer his question? The Torah, when it says the par that he brings, what does the Torah say? So there's a few times actually. It says, as the braisa here will say, the Torah says 3 times the term asher loy. You have the psukim here on the side of the Gemara. Then it says again, asher loy. 3 times it says asher loy. Mishaloi hu mevi, which means he has to bring this carbon from his own money. Not to take the money from the tzibur or from anybody else, from his own money. And the Braisa here spells out all the details. The Tanya we learned in the Braisa. Asher loy. The Torah says that the Kohen Gadol should bring this carbon from his own money. Mishaloi hu mevi, from himself. V'loi mishal tzibur. That doesn't come from the money of the tzibur. Yachal, I would think, lo yavi mishal tzibur, that he's not allowed to take the money from the tzibur, she'enat tzibur miskaprim by, because this is a carbon that there's no kapara for the tzibur. The kapara is for the kohen, for his family, for the kohenim. Aval, but maybe I would still think yavi mishal echav kohenim. He could take money from the kohenim, from his brothers, the kohenim, to contribute to this carbon. Sharei echav hakainim miskaprim by, because the kapara, the vidui, the second vidui he says on this carbon is also for the kainim. Talmud Lai Meditator says a second time, v'hikrivanes parachatas ashaloi again. So to tell you, note that it's only from Aaron HaKayin himself and not even from his brothers the Kayanim. Yachayil, I would still think that lo yavi, he should not lechatchila take the money from his brothers the Kayanim to contribute for this carbon, but maybe b'diyevet ve'im hevi kosher. If the Kayanim did contribute to this carbon and it was brought, maybe b'diyevet it would be kosher, because after all the kapara is for them as well. Talmud Loi Mashuv, the Torah says a third time, asher loi, that the carbon has to be his. Shana hakasav olav la'akiv. The Torah is saying it again to say that this is the way it must be. It must be only his own money, not from the Kayanim. So what do you see from here? So the Gemara is saying from all of this you see that Aaron HaKayin is the only one that's donating to this carbon. It's his carbon. He's not allowed to take money from the tzibur, not even from his brothers the Kayanim. So doesn't that mean that the main kapara, it's for Aaron HaKayin himself? And his brothers, the Kainim, if there's a kapara for them, they're just floating along with him. It's really his carbon. So this should answer Rabbi Lazar's question that this is a carbon yachid and there is temura for this carbon. So the Gemara says, now according to your logic that you're proving it from here, so why don't you ask a more basic question? Echav HaKainim, the brothers the Kainim, ilav the kanu begavei, if they don't contribute in any way to this carbon, it's totally Aaron HaKain's private carbon and his money, so then heichi mechapalu, how do they have a kapara? Where do you find such a thing that Reuven brings a carbon and it's a kapara for Shimon? How is this a kapara for the Echav HaKainim if Aaron HaKain is its own private carbon? So what are you going to have to say? Elo, Shani begaze da Aaron. You're going to have to say that over here, this money that Aaron HaKayin designated for this carbon is different, and there's a special chiddush here. The afkere rachmana gabe echav HaKayinim. The Torah is saying that Aaron has to contribute his own money for his own carbon, but then the Torah says that this carbon should belong to all of the Kayinim. That the vidui and the kapara of the Kayinim should be effective for all Kayinim. So the Torah was mafkir his money to belong to all Kayinim. Otherwise, it makes no sense that he's saying a vidui and he's being mechaper for his brothers the Kainim. So therefore, Hachagabi Tumura Nami, therefore Rabbi Loza has the question regarding Tumura as well, Shani Begaze da Aaron, that maybe this carbon of Aaron, this money that he contributed for this carbon is different. The Afkre Rachmana Gabi Echav HaKainim, that the Torah says that the money of this carbon belongs also to all of the Kainim, and the Bachov here adds a few words to the Gemara. V'yesh loima de miskaper b'kiviyusa, and therefore we could still say that the kapara of all the Kainim, they're not floating along with Aaron HaKayin himself, but they are established on the kapara of the carbon. So therefore that question still remains a question. No, the Gemara does not. The Gemara is not Paishet. The Gemara is not Paishet the Sibaya. Correct. Now we continue going back to exactly where we were holding with the Aveda of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur. So where were we holding? After the Kohen Gadol took the handful of the Keteres, the Chafina, out of the shovel, and now he has a machta of fire on one hand, and the kaf of the Keteres in the other hand, and he has to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So here, the next thing the Mishnah will discuss is exactly what route he takes to enter into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Sagt the Mishnah, so he walks into the Heichal, and he comes to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and there are two curtains, hamavdilos, that separate ben HaKodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. There are two curtains there, uvinei an amma, and between them, the space of an amma, and he walked between those curtains, and he entered into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Rabbi Yossi says, ela pareiches achas bulvad. There was only one pareiches in the Beis HaMikdash. Shenemar v'ivdila pareiches lachem ben HaKodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim. There's one pareiches. It says by the Mishkan that there's one pareiches that separates between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So he doesn't have to walk between the pareiches to go inside, but he can walk straight in. There's an opening by the pareiches, and he goes straight in and into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Okay, so there's a clear pasuk that says pareiches. There's one pareiches. So the Gemara asks, Shape kamalu Rabbi Yossi l'Rabbanon. Rabbi Yossi is bringing a clear pasuk that there's only one pareiches. No, but we'll see soon in the Gemara that if there was two, he had to walk all the way in between. We'll see him at Hashem. Okay, so the Rabbi Yossi's question is, the pasuk clearly says there's one pareiches. So the Gemara answers as follows. Rabbanan Amri Lach, Rabbanan will tell you, Hani Mili b'Mishkan. Yeah, in the Mishkan there was only one pareiches. Avo b'Mikdash Sheni, specifically in the second base of Mikdash, here there were two pareiches. Why? Kivin de loy havoi amatraxen. Since in the second base of Mikdash they did not have the amatraxen. What is this amatraxen? So Rashi explains, amatraxen refers to a very tall wall that separated between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And that wall was an amma thick, and it's called traxen. There are two pshatim what the word traxen means. Rashi says traxen is a combination of two words. According to the Yishalmi, the combination of the two words is trak and sin. It means inside and outside. It separates between what's inside and what's outside. That's Rashi's pshat. Taisus' pshat is that traxen means, trak means to open, to close actually. Trak means to close. And sin is Sinai, which refers to the luchais. The wall of the Kodesh HaKadoshim closes and separates from the luchais that are there in the Aron. So that's why it was called Traxen. But it was an amma thick in the first base of Mikdash. Now the problem was when it came to the second base of Mikdash, the second base of Mikdash was taller than the first base of Mikdash. So if they would want to rebuild the same wall with the same thickness of an amma, so then they're going to have to figure out how this wall can stand that height when it's taller. And so this thickness of an amma, they couldn't make the wall taller because it wouldn't be able to stand. So now what would they do? They would make it thicker than an amma. You're not allowed to change the measurement of the space of the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The height, they were allowed to make it higher. But the space, they can't add to the thickness of this wall. So if they can't add to the thickness of the wall, they were stuck. They couldn't build this wall. So therefore, instead, they put up two curtains. So the Gemara explains, B'mikdash rishayin hu da havoi. In the base of Mikdash, the first base of Mikdash, they had this wall that was thick and amma, and that separated between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And then, when it came to the base of Mikdash Sheni, the Rabbanon had now a suffix regarding the Kedusha of that amma. What's the halacha of the Kedusha of that amma? Ikelifnim, ikelachutz. Does that amma have the kedusha of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or does that amma have the kedusha of outside? And therefore, va'avud shtei pareiches. Therefore, they made two pareiches with a space of an amma in between, and that space of an amma in between, the kedusha of it is either like inside or like outside. They had a suffix when they gave to this kedusha.
So build the wall on that. Amma. Build the wall. On
they can't build a wall on that amma because it's too tall. It's not going to stand. It was because it was lower, so the thickness of a wall was thick enough to hold the height of this wall.
The wall lower in the second base.
The second base of Mikdash was taller. Godly year covered Achna was pasha taller, so they couldn't build it the same thickness. It's not going to stand. To add to the thickness, they're not allowed to add. So then that space of an amma, so maybe you'll say, so just leave that space of an amma, just put up a pareiches instead. But that space of an amma, there's a suffix if it belongs inside or outside. So they made two pareiches, and with a space of an amma in between.
What was higher? The walls from
the height of the Beis HaMikdash. It was higher, taller.
The wall.
Yeah, the Heichal, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, everything. The entire Beis HaMikdash was higher. Okay, so this is the pshat that you have here in the Gemara. So as I mentioned, you have Rashi's pshat and Taisus' pshat in the title of the word Traxen. There's a Narichas de Gesiche from the Rebbe about this Gemara. In Chelik Lamed Vav and Parshas Truma. There the Rebbe says that according to the Rambam, this Amma Traxen is actually a place, even though in the simple pshat of the Gemara it seems like that there's a suffix there here in the kedusha of this place, but the Rebbe proves from the lashon of the Rambam that Lamaskana, the Rambam holds that this place, which is in between, this amma in between, is considered to be a place for itself that has its own category. It's not a suffix. You have the Kodesh, then you have this space of an amma, and then you have the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Three different places. And the Rebbe actually brings, there's a lashon that's used regarding the Kodesh HaKadoshim sometimes. It's called a dvir, and this dvir actually goes on this amma in between, this space of an amma. So the Rebbe explains that the Taisus here asks the question, if the point is to keep an amma in between, why can't they just make one thick pareiches that's thick an amma? Can weave a very, very thick thread and very thick pareiches that's thick an amma. Why do you need that space in between? So the Rambam holds this space in between was actually had a kedusha for itself. It was like an intermediary between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's what this Amma Traxen is all about. Okay. Let's continue the Gemara. So now the Gemara is going to get back to the point of the Mishnah of Mahalach. Exactly how is he walking? So it said in the Mishnah, he walks to the Pereiches and he goes inside. But what's the route that he takes? So we have three different opinions in the Braisa. Tana Rabbanon, the Braisa said that the first opinion is, the route is as follows. Beina Mizbeach leMenorah. When he walks into the Heichal, he's going to walk between the Mizbeach and the Menorah. So let's remember, if you have the picture, you could see this. But basically, the Menorah is on the Darim side, the Shulchan is on the Tzafin side, and the Mizbeach is in the middle, right? So according to the first opinion, he's walking towards Darim side, and he's walking between the Mizbeach and the Menorah, and then he gets to the Pereiches at the Darim side. That's the Divrei Rab Yehuda. Rab Meir says, no, he walks towards the Tzafin side. Bein Shulchan leMizbeach. He's going to be walking between the Shulchan and the Mizbeach closer to Tzafin. And the Yash Aimrim, the third opinion is Bein Shulchan leKaisel, that he walks all the way towards Tzafin. He walks mamish along the wall, the Tzafin wall, straight to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So the Gemara explains, Man Yash Aimrim, who's this last opinion? Rav Chisda Rabbi Yosi. This is Rabbi Yosi of our Mishnah that said that there's only one Pereiches. The Amar, and according to Rabbi Yosi, that there's only one Pereiches, he holds, and the Gemara explains this later on Daf Nun Tes, so according to his opinion, Pische B'Tzafin Koi. The opening where the Pereiches of the Kodesh HaKadoshim was folded over to be able to enter inside, where was it? It was on the Tzafin side. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yosi, he walks along the wall on Tzafin side and he goes straight into the Kodesh HaKadoshim on the Tzafin side. The Gemara is going to later explain that according to the Mandama that you go on the Darim side, so there was, like the Rabbanan said, there was a double Pereiches. And the way it worked is, the Kohen Gadol entered into the Pereiches on the Darim side, that's where it was folded over, and then he had to walk through the entire Amma in between to the Tzafin side, and then he entered in from the Tzafin. But he had to walk through that entire Amma, so therefore he went towards the Darim side. Okay, so now the Gemara explains, Rabbi Yehuda Malach, Rabbi Yehuda says, Pische b'Darim Koi. The opening is on the Darim side, as I just explained. That you have to walk to the opening of the first Pereiches on Darim, walk through the entire Amma, and then enter on the Tzafin side. Now the Gemara asks, Rab Meir, Keman Svirilei. Rab Meir's opinion, who does he follow? What does Rab Meir say? Rab Meir says he goes towards Tzafin, but not all the way at the wall by Tzafin. He goes between the Shulchan and the Mizbeach. So what exactly is the basis of Rab Meir's opinion? If he holds like Rabbi Yehuda that the Kohen Gadol is going to enter on the Darim side, so then Neil Rabbi Yehuda, let him go in like Rabbi Yehuda towards Darim side, between the Mizbeach and the Menorah, not between the Mizbeach and the Shulchan towards Tzafin. If he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosi that is, that he enters in on Tzafin, so Neil Rabbi Yosi, so let him walk in like Rabbi Yosi by the wall, all the way by Tzafin side. Why is he walking between the Shulchan and the Mizbeach? Let him go straight in by the wall into the opening of the Pereiches. So the Gemara answers, La'olam Rabbi Yosi Svirilei. Really, he holds like Rabbi Yosi's opinion. V'amalach, and he'll tell you as follows. He can't walk in by the wall because there's something that's blocking there. Shulchanais, in the first Beis HaMikdash, there were 10 Shulchanais that were there. There were 5 Shulchanais on one side of the Shulchan and 5 on the other side. Shlomo HaMelech, we learned about this before, that he built additional Shulchanis that were placed in the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore those Shulchanis, Tzafin v'Darim Monachim, they were positioned on both sides of the main Shulchan that they built, and both sides they were positioned Tzafin v'Darim. What does it mean they were positioned Tzafin v'Darim? So Rashi explains they were lined up. They were lined up in their length, one next to the other. 5. No, Tzafin v'Darim. 1 second. They were lined up from Tzafin towards Darim. There's 2 opinions. Rashi here brings it's a machlokes. How were these tables lined up? Were these tables lined up? Again, you have the length of a table. They were lined up one next to the other. So how were they lined up? So according to the opinion that we're saying now, they were lined up from Tzafin, starting from Tzafin, going towards Darim. How long was each table? So Rashi brings each table was 2 amos long. So if these tables are lined up one next to the other, and it's 5 tables, and each table is 2 amos long, so you're talking about 10 amos. Basically like a long table, one continuing from the next, 10 amos long. How wide was the entire Heichal? The entire Heichal was 20 amos wide. The Shulchanis are supposed to be only on Tzafin side, including these tables that Shlomo HaMelech put inside, they're all supposed to be only on Tzafin side. So if you want those tables to be only on the tzafin side, which is the 10 amas of tzafin, and not to protrude into the darim side, it has to start all the way by the wall. They started the table mamish by the wall, and then it continued 10 amas till the end of tzafin side. So it comes out that according to this opinion, you can't walk by the wall because it's cutting. The shulchanis are cutting off your way to go there, right? So, maybe, but he's saying in the first, so it could be because this is the way it was done in the first Beis Hamikdash. It continued this way in the second Beis Hamikdash as well. So it was mafsikalei shulchan. So the Gemara says, so therefore the shulchan separates your path or cuts off your path to be able to go in near the wall. V'lei misayele, you can't enter from there. Rashi actually points out, but if that's the way that separates, it goes 10 feet basically. You have these 2 rows of tables, 10 feet long. So how could he go between the Mizbeach and the Shulchan? Doesn't it cut off his path there as well? So Rashi explains, but the Mizbeach was not between the Shulchan and the Menorah. The Mizbeach was further to the front. So he's able to go between and get his way in. Okay, so that's why it didn't go like what Rabbi Yossi says. V'bay same, the Gemara gives another teretz. La'olam mizrach ma'irav menachem. If you want, I can say that really those tables that Shlomo HaMelech built were not going from Tzafin towards Darim. They did not obstruct this path. They were going from Mizrach to Ma'irav. So he did have a path to go straight along the wall, straight into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But the reason he didn't go is Mishum Shchina, because of this, the presence of the Shchina in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Lav Eirach Ara L'Mei L'Hedya. It's not that derech to walk straight ahead. When you walk straight ahead, so from where the Kohen Gadol starts walking, he can see straight into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, straight in. It's more derech to come from the side, and he's not able to look directly into the Kodesh HaKadoshim from when he starts walking. Rabbi Yossi Amalach, according to this pshat, so what does Rabbi Yossi say? Why could the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur walk with such a breitkeit? He walks straight in a straight path, and he doesn't have to come from the side. So Rabbi Yossi tells you, Chaviv in Yisrael. No, this expresses the love of the Eibishter to Yidden. Shaloi yatzrichen hakasav l'shliach. And the truth is that the Yidden don't even need a shliach for the Kohen Gadol, that is, to go in for them to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Rashi over here says that really, the Eibishter says that, Rashi brings a pasuk that it says regarding the first Beis Hamikdash, that Ashiyadin ish nagal avava yaparas kapav alabayis hazeh, that really every individual Yid could come and daven to the Eibishter, and he doesn't even need the Kohen Gadol, because there's the love that the Eibishter has for every single Yid. So therefore, even when you do send the Kohen Gadol as a shliach, the Kohen Gadol could go in directly, he can walk in straight because of the love of the Eibishter to Yidden. The Gemara concludes this inyan, and the Gemara asks for Rabbi Yehuda, not going back to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. What did Rabbi Yehuda say? That you have to enter from the Darim side. Now, but even according to Rabbi Yehuda, he doesn't walk along the wall. He goes between the Menorah and the Mizbeach, towards Safin, but not near the wall. So the question is, Rabbi Yehuda, Nami, nail be Menorah lekaisel. Why doesn't he walk all the way towards Darim, near the wall? So the Gemara answers, he can't go over there, because mashchiri monei, the menorah that's near the wall, so it makes the wall black. If he's going to walk near the wall, he's going to rub against the wall, and his begodim, his white begodim, are going to get black. So therefore he walks between the mizbeach and the menorah, not to get black by the wall. I mentioned Rashi's pshat that the love of the Eibishter for Yidden is the fact that the Eibishter says every Yid could daven himself to the Eibishter. The Taisus Yishanim says that the love of the Eibishter for Yidden is the fact that the Kohen Gadol came in without any bells, that made no noise. Every day when the Kohen Gadol came in V'nishma kaila b'vaya l'kodesh. What does that mean? Before you come into the Eibishter, so it's proper derech eretz to make noise, that I'm coming, not just to come in. The Kohen Gadol, when he came in on Yom Kippur, so he made no noise, because the love of the Eibishter is that he can come in without knocking on the door, so to speak. Therefore, he can go straight in towards the wall that goes straight into the entrance. That's the Taisus Yishana. But if you remember, Rashi learned before. Rashi's opinion was that the handle of the pan had a bell, had a ring that made noise. That's Rashi's shitta. But other Rishonim hold that it did not have that ring, and he walked in quietly. So over here, you see this machlekes as well.